Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Whole Tooth, a podcast all about sharks, rays and their underwater habitat, brought to you by the Save Our Seas Foundation. I'm your host Isla, and every episode I sit down with experts in shark science and conservation to ask them your questions and basically help spread awareness and understanding of just how amazing these animals are and how diverse they are as a group. And, try and build a community of shark nerds across the world. And I actually met one of you nerds on a boat yesterday, in person, in the middle of the sea, on the west coast of Scotland. It was very surreal, but also really lovely as well. Sarah, hello, and thank you for listening to the podcast. It was great to meet you in person, and I hope that we get to meet more of you listeners in the future. We absolutely love hearing from you. Thank you so much to everyone who has sent their comments in about the podcast or got in touch to say hi. We really love hearing from you and finding out where you are in the world. And I know we have listeners from all over the place. So we are starting to build that community of shark nerds, which is absolutely great. Now, on to today's show. I am so unbelievably excited for this one because it is one of my favourite topics to learn about and talk about, and my guests today really are pioneers in their field who are making new and exciting and very important discoveries. I was lucky enough to get to pick the brains of deep sea shark researchers Paul Clerkin and Sofia Aranha, who are very kindly going to guide us on a journey into the deepest, darkest parts of our oceans to meet some of its incredible inhabitants. Now, the deep sea might seem like a vast, empty, cold void that doesn't support much life, and for a really long time, that was actually common understanding until science and technology advanced enough and we were able to explore more of it. And we found out that not only does it support life, but a huge diversity of species, especially in particular areas like seamounts and hydrothermal vents, where specialist communities thrive, and we talk all about that in this episode. Those species include many sharks, rays and skates who have fantastical adaptations to allow them to survive in such challenging conditions, like slingshot jaws, superpowered electroreception, and the ability to glow in the dark. And because much of the deep sea is still unexplored, we are discovering new species and new weird and wonderful adaptations all the time. And believe it or not, this is what Paul and Sofia do as their day jobs. They are both Save Our Seas project leaders working with deep sea fishermen to assess and identify the elasmobranchs that are brought up from the deep, some of them that are new to science. Paul's project focused on the communities around seamounts that are kind of like underwater mountains, and he specialises in the descriptions and life histories of rare and newly discovered deep sea sharks. Sofia is a PhD candidate based at the University of Algarve, and she works with deep sea crustacean trawlers in Portugal to evaluate the health of deep sea elasmobranchs that have been brought up as bycatch. She aims to better understand how deep sea trawling might impact the survival and condition of deep sea species through the Delasmop project. Both Sofia and Paul are using their research to spread awareness of the incredible species that we find in the depths and provide vital information as to the threats that they may face. And that's something that we discuss throughout this episode, because human impacts are reaching into somewhere as otherworldly and seemingly inaccessible as the deep sea and affecting the sharks there, and that's what their work is all about, and they're looking to inform deep sea fisheries management with that new knowledge that they're getting. Paul and Sofia are so incredibly passionate about what they do, and it was such a joy to chat to both of them and learn more about their work, their drive to protect deep sea elasmobranchs, and of course meet some of these awesome sharks. Just as a side note, please feel free to Google image search some of these species as we go, especially the goblin shark, which is a personal favourite of mine, and you will find out why in this episode. But yes, it's always worth Googling these species and having a look for yourself about how weird and alien-like they are, but also how amazing they are at the same time. Okay, I'm rambling, so without further ado, let's hop into the submersible and dive into our episode on deep sea sharks. Hello, Paul and Sophia, and welcome to the Whole Tooth podcast.
Hello, Isla. Hello, Paul. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Isla. Hi, Sophia.
And we're going to start with a question that I ask every guest on this podcast, and that is, what is your most memorable experience in the ocean? So, Sophia, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, so I had quite a few memorable experience in the ocean, but one of my favorites is from my early days when I was diving in South Africa. I used to do. I was an intern in a shark research center, and we did a trip. I dove with many black tip sharks. It was like my first time diving with sharks, and it was exciting and also scary because I didn't know what to feel, but I got that thrill to be experiencing this for the first time. But I had another memorable moment. I don't want to be unfair, but with sand tiger sharks in North Carolina in a wreck. There were so many, like hundreds of them, and many shark teeth hiding in the sand. So it was like a amazing playground. And those are one of my favorites.
They are both brilliant experiences. So the second one is kind of almost like a treasure hunt combined with a shark dive at the same time, which sounds
exactly
really cool. Which shark research centre was it in South Africa?
It was Oceans Research.
Okay.
For great white sharks. It was amazing time.
What a fantastic experience to have. Paul, how about you? What is your most memorable experience in the ocean?
Yeah, I think probably one of the megamouth projects that I was doing. One of the times they were getting them off Taiwan, and we were trying to tag them. So we went out and they fish at night. They put out the tags kind of at sunset and pull them up at sunrise. And so we're just waiting all night, for the nets to soak, and then they were pulling them in, and it takes hours. So we're just looking over the rail, and then they got a megamouth. It was kind of crazy. I remember being like almost not prepared. Like that's what we were there for, but like I couldn't believe they got a megamouth. And then I put on my gear. I was just on snorkel, and then I jumped in. And it's black, it's pitch black, because it's we're on a fishing boat in the middle of the night, and then I have like my flashlight, and once the bubbles all clear my mask, and I look up, there's just like a gigantic megamouth there. Yeah, it was
amazing.
Yeah, I think it was like a 23-footer. I forget what that is in meters, but it was a big fish. It was a really big shark, and I think also like the fact that it's like a megamouth just really uncommon, and poorly studied. So that was really cool. And like, in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, it's a megamouth. Like and I'm sure the megamouth didn't have the same experience. It's probably just like, let me get out of here. So, but we were able to, we were able to tag it, and then we released it, and it swam at the surface for it was like 10 feet of water, and I just swam with it, and I would hold my breath, dive down, kind of swim next to it, and go back up. And I just did that for way too long. I had the thought, no one would know there's a megamouth right here, if I wasn't swimming with it with a flashlight. But then, anyway, then the boat was way, way far away, so I had to swim back. It probably was a little bit irresponsible.
I'm sure they understood though. Yeah, I would completely get distracted by a megamouth as well. That's insane. I imagine not many people have been able to say they've swum with a megamouth, let alone see one in real life. Like when you first started saying that, I thought that you'd pulled it up onto the boat, like it had been, reeled up as bycatch, but to actually swim with it is just mental. And I imagine they look quite weird in real life in the best way possible, because all the pictures that I've seen of them, they look like some sort of made up animal.
It looks like if a kid drew a shark, and then that's the shark. Yeah, they got kind of those goofy little snozzes, and they're like their heads. Yeah, it's very kind of round in the front, so their eyes are just they almost look like little googly eyes on the front. But yeah,
it's awesome. Sounds adorable.
They are. They're pretty cute, and they're they're actually a little bit more iridescent, like especially around the mouth and stuff like that. So they're kind of pretty.
Yeah, what a cool shark. What a special experience. We talked a little bit about sharks sort of being, although we think they're really cool, a lot of people don't, and it's quite an unusual thing to form a fascination for sharks and to even to go on to work with them, even still now. And especially the species and the environments that you both work in, because you both work in deep sea research, you research deep sea sharks, the threats to deep sea sharks. And, in a world where, a lot of people might study great white sharks or might study whale sharks, I was interested to know sort of what took you on that career path. So Paul, I'll talk to you first. How did you get involved in deep sea research? What took you on that journey?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, I think you're right. I think the deep sea sharks is like reserved for like the hardcore shark nerds. Lots of shark fans are like white sharks and like, oh yeah, hammerheads and whale sharks. But a lot of the deep sea sharks, people don't know about, and a lot of them we don't have that much information on. So that's part of like my fascination was when I started, in my earlier years in undergrad and stuff, learning more about sharks and kind of beyond just the shark fan stuff, but like learning some actual studying sharks. Learning that there are so many different species and how diverse sharks can be was really interesting, and that's something I always think people are not really aware how many species there are, and different shapes and sizes, and the different adaptations and roles that they have. So I was really interested in that, which kind of led into the deep sea. I was always interested in deep sea as being kind of that kind of alien environment on the planet, especially if you think it's most of our planet's livable space is deep sea, and we just know very little about it. So yeah, I was interested in deep sea sharks and kind of the lesser known sharks, and that segued into me working on a commercial boat that they were deep sea trawling in the Indian Ocean, and they let me go along and just collect their bycatch, and we got a bunch of weird sharks, and we got a large number of new species, and that's where it was really exciting. It was about a dozen new species, and that's about 1/3 of the species that we encountered. So like 1 out of 3 species was new to science, which is crazy.
That is mental. Yeah, when I was researching you for the podcast, I did read that, and I thought, because that was quite early on in your scientific career, and most people, wait decades to, find a new species, and then all of a sudden you were confronted with multiple of them. Just such a cool field and such a new field as well. And we will be talking about some of those species later on in this episode, which I am so excited to get into. But Sofia, how about you? How did you get into deep sea research?
So it was kind of an accident because I always work with sharks, and when I came to Portugal, I'm originally from Brazil. I came to Portugal to do my master's here, and in my university, no one was working with sharks at that time. So I came to my supervisor and said, okay, I want to work with sharks. And he said, no, but we don't have that here. No one is working with sharks. You can work with fish and other stuff. And I said, no, I don't want to. I don't want to deviate from my path. I want to continue my work with sharks. And he said, okay, so I will put you in a bottom trawler, a crustacean bottom trawler that we have a contact with. And then I had to we have to create a project for that purpose. So we are going on a crustacean bottom trawler. What can we find? So the deep sea sharks are a huge bycatch on the crustacean bottom trawler. They are not targeted by any fisheries, especially because in Europe they are protected. There are some species that are protected. So I did find quite a lot of interesting and sad things as well. So what happened is that I finished my master wanting to know more, because there were huge gaps in knowledge still for my area, for this area of research, fisheries and deep sea sharks. And I could not I could not pass through it. So when I was thinking about my PhD, I said, okay, I will continue to do this. I don't like to see sharks suffering. I see many dead sharks. It's really frustrating. But at the same time, like it was necessary, and I think, okay, so I need to I need to just do it, and I need to gather most information that I can on these animals. So I continue to work with sharks, and now I'm working as well with deep sea skates. So
cool,
yeah.
Cool. Oh, amazing. I had a little nerd out a couple of weeks ago about a deep sea skate that I don't know if you work with this species, it's the flapper skate or the giant skate, I think it's called. And there's a beach in Orkney, so it is a deep sea species, but there's a beach in Orkney right at the top of Scotland where you can find hundreds of these egg cases, and they're like this. The egg cases are like the size of your head. They're huge. Such a cool species. So I had a little nerd out about that. But yeah, such important work that you do, because it was definitely my assumption, and I know it's an assumption of quite a lot of people, that deep sea sharks are relatively safe because they are so deep, and a lot of people think they're inaccessible, but that's not often the case, and that's something we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But yeah, you guys are doing such fascinating, interesting, but also super important research as well, which I'm so excited to learn about. Thinking about the deep sea, I thought it would be a good place to start to talk about what we mean when we say the deep sea, what it's actually like down there. And Paul, you mentioned earlier that there's just so much of our world is the deep sea. So much of it is unexplored. It actually hurts my brain to think about the numbers and how deep things are and what that is an equivalent to, on a surface level. But I think quite a common misconception again is that the deep sea is actually, a very barren environment that doesn't have much life in it at all, let alone sharks. And Sofia, you spend a lot of your time, as you said, on the crustacean trawlers, analysing the species that get, brought up from the deep sea. And I was interested to know, is there any truth to that statement that the deep sea doesn't have much in the way of life?
Yes and no, I think. I think this is most due to the misconception that because there is no photosynthesis happening below 1,000 meters depth or so, life cannot sustain in those type of environments. And that's far from the truth. Actually, we do have some muddy flats, which we don't find a lot going on there, but there are also areas with high productivity, such as vents, seamounts, sunken whale carcasses, dolphin carcasses, which concentrates a significant amount of life around it. So yes and no.
Yeah, so there can be big open spaces, but there are also areas where life concentrates. And I just wondered if I could pick up on something that you said there about the whale carcasses. Like, how does that work? Can you explain that to somebody who maybe isn't familiar with that whole process?
Sure. So whale carcasses can beach or they can sink. Not all carcasses sink, but when they do, they sink up to the depth where is the limit depth of that area. And with that, a lot of scavengers take opportunity to feed on. It's like a feast. It's a giant carcasses that can stay there for days or even months or years. So scavengers like octopus, brittle stars, starfishes, sea urchins, a lot of animals can feed from that, and even sharks can feed on that as well. So it's a good place to concentrate life in the deep ocean as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there's some really cool videos that you can actually find on YouTube from the deep sea submersibles where researchers have actually planted they've found a whale carcass, or they've planted, I think one was an alligator that they planted on the seafloor to see what species kind of arrived on those carcasses. So yeah, it's a really cool thing that I definitely didn't think about before I started learning about it. And of course, one of the other habitats that you mentioned were seamounts. And I know, Paul, that you've done a project that looks at the different shark species around seamounts. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about their ecosystems, because they are so cool.
Yeah, I think seamounts are really cool, and that's probably a biased opinion, but yeah, I think they are really cool. They're uh, they make up relatively a small amount. I forget what it is, only a couple percent of deep sea, but we estimate that there could be 100,000 seamounts in the ocean, and they are cool. They add structure. They function kind of like underwater islands. They are kind of just shaped like a mountain, and they're separated by great depths. And a lot of the time, these islands are kind of separated, and you can have different species between different seamounts that are relatively close. So it's a hotspot for biodiversity, and they also food winds up concentrating on them. Because like plankton, when they go up and down through the water column, and the current's moving them. When they go down, the plankton get concentrated on the seamount, and then they go up and moves on, and you kind of get like this little conveyor belt, kind of like cookie cutter thing, where you get more food at the seamounts, and because of that, you have more. It can support more life. You get more species, and so they are kind of like little underwater islands separated by these depths of the ocean.
Mm-hmm. And that can even lead up to quite close to the surface, right? So not the seamount itself, but the effect of it. Because I know that you get some areas where you see really large aggregations of sharks, for example, in shallower waters, but that's because it's still above a seamount.
Oh yeah. I mean, some of the seamounts can be relatively close to the surface. One in the Indian Ocean that we would fish around Walter Shoal. It gets within 27 meters of the surface, which is very shallow. But you get concentrations of fish, larger fish, and sharks. So you kind of get everything kind of aggregating around there, and you have your own little ecosystem, and they can be pretty different. A lot of the time, when I was working with the commercial fishers, and they would switch seamounts for the sake of fishing, but it would very often be a pretty different species composition. Even at just a seamount right next to another seamount could be pretty different. And a lot of the time, we get like new species at just next to these seamounts. One of them, we had two cat sharks, and they were both new species, and they looked similar, but they were separated by these seamounts, and it was not a great distance, but it was a great depth between them.
Yeah, so really are like islands then, in that way, like how you describe them, in that you can also have species that are kind of endemic to even that particular seamount, just like you would an island on land. That's so cool. And we talked a little bit about there being these areas where you get really high productivity and you get lots of different species. So, the seamounts, like you said, the whale carcasses, the hydrothermal vents, areas like that. But I wondered if we could talk a little bit about what the deep sea, what kind of conditions, so say you are a deep sea shark, what kind of conditions are you working with down there?
I think one of the big things that besides like the temperature and the pressure and everything, one of the things that's common in the deep sea, especially in like less dense areas, is just food scarcity. There's not a lot of prey items, so it's kind of an arms race between sharks to detect prey and prey to avoid being detected. It's kind of I think most fish in the ocean, especially in the deep sea, they want to see the prey, but they don't want anything else to see them.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because that brings me kind of on to my next point a little bit, in that obviously food is so scarce in the deep sea, so a lot of deep sea species, but it's also very dark down there, so a lot of deep sea species must rely quite heavily on their sense of smell and also on their electroreceptions, because you don't want to miss food when it comes across you in the deep sea. Definitely don't want to miss the opportunity for a meal. And I just wondered, are there any kind of general adaptations that these sharks have to help them thrive in that sort of difficult environment?
So we have a lot of cool adaptations like bioluminescence. from lantern sharks to kind of create counter shading, so they match the ambient light and they can't be detected. But then there's also there's fish that do that, and then there's a lot of deep sea sharks have kind of special lenses on their eyes. So even though the prey could be blending into the surroundings, they can kind of sense that it's a different kind of light and find them still. So it's kind of that kind of thing. Or being able to eat large prey items. So if you encounter something that's really big, you can still eat it. Just trying to maximize encounters with prey when you can.
Yeah, so as Paul said beautifully, they have eyes really well adapted. Like one of my favorite sharks is the kitefin shark, because the eyes of the kitefin shark is like a cartoon eye. It's really beautiful and large, long eye. They have the eyes to capture the smallest lights from the bioluminescence of other animals, but it can play as well a role on finding mates or to camouflage from predators as well. Some sharks, as Paul said, they have bioluminescence, so they can camouflage, or they can use it to find mates or to attract some prey. And also, like other species, other shark species and coastal species, they have huge liver full of squalene, which helps them keep their buoyancy stable.
Cool. And Paul, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I mean, I think, yeah, one of the things is the eyes. They have large, reflective, like beautiful eyes. You get like blues, greens, and like yellow eyes, depending on the different species, and they're just they're just kind of very brilliant, bright eyes, and that's because they have the reflective layer to maximize the amount of light that they can detect, and then also like the different color for detecting different species, and then the large liver is an interesting one that helps them kind of stay buoyant, and a lot of these sharks, because they're living in a low energy environment, the livers can store energy, but also helps them stay buoyant, and then they can swim very kind of slowly. So interestingly, a lot of these sharks, which are top predators in these deep sea areas, are just very flabby, and just kind of like a water balloon, sometimes flabby, and they likely can cruise very slowly and quietly and sneak up on prey items. I've actually encountered some sleeper sharks, long-nosed velvet dogfish, and Portuguese dogfish with mammal meat in their stomachs. Something with hair on it was probably a seal, but it could have found a carcass. But like it also, they've been kind of theorized that they can slowly just kind of glide up on something and take a bite and swim off.
Right, okay. Yeah, and sleeper sharks, that's the same family that Greenland sharks come from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just because of like how slow they move and how slow they live life. And I did want to talk about some of those species that we can find in the deep sea, because I think a lot of people will be surprised just how many that you can find. So I'm not expecting you to reel off a full list of all the deep sea species that exist. But I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about some of them.
There's a group of sharks called lantern sharks, and I think they're very interesting. For the most part, they're less than a meter long. A lot of the time, they're about half a meter long, and most of them, as the name kind of implies, most of them can generate light, and they do this along their bellies, their flanks, and then their spines. They have two spines on their back, and they use the light along their bellies. They use for counter illumination to match the ambient light to try to hide from predators. The flanks on their sides, they have these little photophore markings, which we think they use to communicate within their species. They've done studies, and they've found that that species have this little window in their eye to help. This is like a species-specific lens to help identify other lantern sharks of the same species. And yeah, it's crazy. And then they have the spines, and the thought with the illumination on the spines is just a warning to predators, just to show off that they're armed and dangerous.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my God, what cool things. And lantern sharks, like, I mean, I don't know much about them other than they can glow in the dark, and that they find them in the deep sea, but I've always understood them to be quite small as well, or is that a huge generalization?
Yeah, there's about 50 different species. Some of them can be very small, like maybe I think it's 8 inches. And then I think the largest, I believe the largest lantern shark on record is the southern lantern shark, and it was 93 centimeters, maybe 93 point something.
Right, yeah, but still in shark terms, not
Oh, yeah.
massive, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, really cool. And Sophia, okay, your turn.
So I have so many deep water sharks that I would like to acknowledge, but I think I like the uncommon sharks that we don't find, like we find once in a lifetime, because they are super rare. But at the same time, for example, the goblin shark and the frill shark, so we find them really not often at all, very, very, very little. We just found like in around more than 3,000 individuals. We had one goblin shark, and it was like a large female, and she died on board. She was really distressed. She was like 2.5 meters long. She was big, but not the biggest one. And she died. And what I did, I cut her head. I collected the most of it I could, but I collect her head, and then I use her jaws to do educational, environmental educational activity with kids for Save Our Seas project. And yeah, I think the goblin shark for me is one of the most, when you think about deep sea sharks, you think about alien-like sharks. They are not at all, they don't look like the coastal sharks, right? They are smaller sharks, but we have quite common sharks. For example, the cat sharks, they are really common and they lay eggs. We have also the lantern shark, as Paul said, which is also really common here in our fishing. So those are the most common species of sharks, and the dogfish sharks as well. So we have a lot of different shark species.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you mentioned the goblin shark there, because you sent me a picture of you with those jaws that you talked about earlier, and your head inside the jaws. And I love goblin sharks. Like you said, they are so weird. They look like they've been made in some sort of 80s sci-fi movie. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about some of their adaptations, because they are particularly odd.
Yeah. So the goblin shark, they have a long nostril, a snout, a very long snout, and I dissected, and it's just like a really long cartilage thing and a flappy skin around it, with tons of ampullae of Lorenzini on it, and when you squeeze it, it's just the jelly-like coming out of the ampullae of Lorenzini.
Nice.
So we don't know much about them because they are really they are very uncommon, because they are supposed to live in depths where the fishermen don't go, right? But fishermen here, bottom trawlers, they can only go up to 800 meters depth. But we caught goblin sharks when we were trawling 1,300 meters depth. And it was illegal. But again, fishermen, they were doing their fishing. So I'm not there to tell them what to do. I'm just there to do the research. And unfortunately, sometimes they don't do legal stuff. But at the same time, it's an opportunity to get really weird creatures. And it was during this trip that we caught some really weird sharks. The sailfin rough shark as well. We know very little about it. But the goblin shark, the mouth of the goblin shark dilocate from the jaws dilocate from the cranium to collect the prey. So I don't know much about it because we already have like 18 species of sharks that I'm trying to understand little by little. So it's a lot of sharks to go into details, and I cannot go into details on there. But if Paul knows about more about the goblin shark, he's more than welcome to talk a bit because I just know that they are really weird creatures and very, 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 for me, they are really cute creatures.
Definitely unique, right?
Yeah.
Cute in their own way.
Yeah. I mean, I think you covered all. I mean, they really do have like that weird appearance. They look, unreal. They have that big kind of scary mouth, like Sofia says, protrudes out. They can slingshot it out. They actually have a ligament, special ligament that's designed just to keep the jaws from getting ripped off their face when they shoot them out. But and the image that we all see is the goblin shark with its jaws protruding. But when they're alive and in the water, those jaws are actually up in their mouths, and they're a lot kind of more like a long dagger-like shape. They have that long rostrum and those little beady eyes and big flabby bodies, so they're interesting. And I guess, Sophie, you probably can tell us more about the color, but, in life they have kind of a unique kind of pinkish color with blue fins, right?
They are pinkish, and their skin is really smooth. Like it's not fragile skin, but it's you cannot tell it has scales. I don't know. I think it has, but you cannot see that. And they are very pinkish. And the nostrils, they have really interesting nostrils. When I dissected, me and my student, we dissected, and the nostrils inside they have like this huge in the cranium, this huge structure only for the nostrils, and it has a lot of lamellae inside, and it's really interesting. So the nostrils must play a really important role as well in their diet, in finding food or something like that.
My next question about deep sea sharks is, do we know anything about the role that they have in their ecosystem? So, do we know kind of like what role they play? So, Paul, I'll come to you first on this one.
So a lot of the deep sea sharks we don't have a lot of information on. About half of all deep sea sharks are data deficient, so we have very little idea of them. But most sharks are keystone predators in the environments that they inhabit. So, we kind of theorize that deep sea sharks could be, even the small flabby ones could be top-down predators on these seamounts, and they could be the biggest, baddest fish out there, even if they're small and flabby. But yeah, they usually have an important role as predators, regulating species below them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So even deep sea sharks, kind of flabby and slow, works for them.
Yeah, and we don't know a lot about these seamounts. So out of the theorized 100,000 seamounts that we think exist, we mostly know of their position based on satellites picking up different heights of water over them because of the gravity. So that's why you can go into Google Maps and see these seamounts, but we've actually never been there to study them. We've only studied about 300 seamounts. Isn't that crazy to think about?
That is mad.
Yeah, and so we know very little about these seamounts or sharks' roles in these seamounts. But even like a little shark, we got these little cat sharks. They're a new species, and they were adorable. They had these little squished up faces and these big water balloon bellies, and I called them Cutie Eye, was what I said I was going to name them.
Please tell me you did.
But I didn't. Unfortunately, we did not. No, we came up with a serious grown-up scientist name for him. But we don't. They could have been the top predator. QDI could be an adorable top-down predator on some of these seamounts. Because if it's all smaller fish, they could be top dog.
Yeah, have a really important role. Sofia, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah. For my master's, I studied the diet of some deep water species through a stable isotope analysis. So we found out that the usual, and there are some sharks that they are more of generalist feeders, and there are others that are more selective feeders. But there are also others that are scavengers, but I don't know that because I did. For you to study the diets through stable isotopes, you need to collect small amount of muscle from the potential prey. So I cannot collect a whale carcass muscle, but we do know that these sharks can be also scavengers because as we said, the deep sea can be very very inhospitable place without much to find, and some animals, they just take opportunity on whatever they find, right? So but I think but like any other sharks, they can be like very relevant in the habitat they live in, because either by predating or either by being predated by other species. But what I see from my studies that they occupy high trophic positions in the food web. So I think they play a relevant role on that. But that's what I'm also studying in my PhD as well. I'm trying to go deeper into their roles.
Yeah, and find out more, and it'll be so fascinating to see what you both find kind of moving forwards in this like really sort of relatively new and very unexplored field. Obviously the deep sea, it's so tens of thousands of kilometers you're talking about in some areas, not that easy for humans to get to, so it's not as if you can just pop on your scuba gear and head down and do some research. So how do you research sharks in the deep sea? I know you've been talking about this a little bit, so Sofia, I'll come to you first on that one.
So my research, as I said earlier, I go on board a fishing vessel, and and whatever they catch in the net, I try to separate sharks. So when they are sorting the sharks, they are sorting the crustaceans. I collect the sharks, put them in a tank, and then I do this. I don't increase their shark catchability. I'm just there randomly to catch some samples and to analyze the sharks, because for you to study these animals, you cannot put them in a tank in an aquarium, right? Because the deep sea is such a difficult environment to work with, and the reason is that you cannot create a closer environment in earth, in land, as the deep sea. So for you to study these sharks, you either have to collect them with a net or long lines and whatever, or even with ROVs or AUVs. But those are different type of analysis that I'm not doing for my work. But for my work, I really need to put my hands on them. So unfortunately, that's the only way I can study them.
Yeah, but it does make sense though, because while people are fishing in those areas, it makes sense to take advantage of having a look at what kind of species come up with the species that they're targeting, right?
Exactly. I try not to. What we do is that we put them in a tank, so we diminish their their time on air, and we release the live ones, all the live sharks. So we don't stress them out. So we just release them. But there are some sharks that are really, really in poor conditions, and I don't think they will survive. So one of the aspects that we are finding is more or less like this: 90% of the sharks die because of this fishery.
Yeah. That's a lot, and
it's a lot.
It's very sad, but also not surprising, because as you said, they're coming up from an area that's so different to what our existence is like. So, high pressure, different temperature, and they're getting pulled up, I imagine, relatively quickly as well. So they're not really getting that time to adjust.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
That's quite a shock for them, either in terms of temperature changes, in terms of pressure changes, and also inside their bodies, their organs. They get barotrauma because of the pressure changes. So
yeah, so just like being a diver, like if anyone listening is a scuba diver, like you're always taught, do not go up to the surface really fast, because it can do bad things to your insides. And imagine that for a shark that is way deeper than we could even go on our own human scuba diving equipment. And Paul, how about you? Do you have similar research methods, or do you do something slightly different, or how do you research sharks in the deep sea?
I think, my method's similar to Sofia. I'm lucky to have a relationship with deep sea trawlers in the Indian Ocean, and it works out well. I think it's a little bit strange, and Sofia mentioned it too, like for someone to be passionate about sharks and have to deal with dead sharks all the time is not really why you got into it, but you wind up being able to answer a lot of questions that, that you have and that will help the species. But working with the deep sea trawlers, it's such a useful collaboration, because they're going out and they're fishing anyway, and so they have funding. They have commercial funding. If me and Sofia wanted to charter a research boat to go out to the deep sea for 3 months with a crew, like, it would be crazy how much money you would need to like rent a boat and hire a crew. So that by itself is very valuable. Plus, they have a lot of knowledge. They're fishing these deep sea seamounts, and if I went out with my boat, I would get the net stuck for sure. First time I put the net out, I would like lose it. But they know how to fish. They know the area, and they're really, they're experts at what they're doing. So to be able to piggyback on their fishing activity and catalog the sharks and collect data is really valuable. Even if it's just, I've been talking to some people, and even just like knowing what species are coming from where out there is a big step for some of these groups that want to have distribution of species. Then relative number and maturity and all that stuff is important. And then also because we can't go down there. Sending cameras down and anything like that is a useful way to kind of peek into the deep sea and see what these habitats are like.
But I mean, you made a really good point there, in that these fishermen are out there every single day. They're seeing the species every single day as they're coming up in the nets, and they've got some idea of where to go, possibly what kind of species you might see where, as you said, and it's really valuable information that, especially for the deep sea, we don't necessarily have. And because it's such a huge, vast area, you do need some sort of idea of where to start. And as it's, I imagine it's really sad to see, a lot of dead sharks on board, but also without that, you wouldn't have been able to identify new species. We wouldn't know about their physiology. We wouldn't know about some of the adaptations that they have. So I imagine it's a bit of a double-edged sword for both of you. But one thing that is slightly worrying is, like you mentioned before, is that there are threats to deep-sea sharks. We are seeing deep-sea fishing potentially having an impact, as you said earlier, Sofia, and what you both do is work on those vessels and see the animals that are being brought up as bycatch, even if they're not being targeted directly. And I wanted to ask, so I'll come to you, Paul, first. And, why is it so important to understand these kind of rarer species and to keep discovering them as kind of like a first part of the question? And the second part is, you've already touched on this a little bit, but for your project, you formed a collaboration between lots of different partners, including some of the deep sea fisheries. And I wondered, how are you using your data from that kind of from those rare species to help inform management of those fisheries? A big question, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. So I'll try to answer it in some parts. I think, the basic taxonomy stuff that we did out there, describing the new species, is a very important job. I think sound taxonomy is important for future research. Being able to discern which species or which is important to put together any life history information, but also just having a name and knowing that the sharks are there is important, because they're still exposed to the same anthropogenic fishing pressures from being caught as bycatch, whether we know they're there or not. So just knowing that they exist, having a way to tell them apart, and a name to which we can communicate with other scientists, fishers, or policymakers is an important first step. I think it's kind of sometimes overlooked by people doing more in-depth analysis, but just knowing what's there and being able to tell them apart is important, because sometimes you get people doing analysis and they'll include multiple species by accident because they'll be hard to tell apart, or one species will be cryptic, maybe unknown, and it totally can mess up your life history estimates if you're including two different species. And then there's also the basic life history stuff that we put together while we're out there, and that's some of the groups that I've been working with. They've been saying it's probably one of the more in-depth explorations of the sharks in the area. So I think that's a good baseline for a lot of these things, and we're continuing to work with the fishers, and then also some of the RFMOs and NGOs on how to get more information. The fishers are going out there, and a lot of these boats hire an observer or voluntarily contribute data. But if it's, if the taxonomy is an issue, or if they're limited in the data that they can collect, sometimes they don't yield a lot of stuff. So I think continuing to work with them and maybe creating this pipeline of data from the fishers would really help, even if we can just get, what species they're catching where and what number. That's a lot of information.
Yeah, definitely. And because if you don't know what's there, you don't know what you might lose by over exploiting that area of that population. And I imagine a lot of the fisheries are actually really interested to find what sort of weird species they're sort of bringing up on board. So it might be quite interesting for them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is always the kind of the thought, like, what if one of these species goes extinct before we even discover it or name it. And I've been lucky with these fishers. I know people have different relationships with policymakers and fishers, but they are very interested in what's there, and they've kind of voluntarily let me go on the boats, and they let me collect anything I want. So they're not trying to hide any of this stuff. They do want to know what the species are and what we can do.
Yeah, that's really positive. That's really nice to hear. And Sofia, I've got a similar question to you, which is, can you tell our listeners about the Delasmop project? I don't know if I'm saying that right. Please correct me if I'm saying that wrong. That's how I read it. And how are you working with those crustacean trawlers to improve their practices through the project?
Okay, so you mentioned correctly. It's Delasmop because it's deep sea elasmobranchs of Portugal. So in Delasmop, our goal is to better understand about this whole interaction among the bottom trawlers and the deep sea elasmobranchs. But due to the enormous gaps in knowledge, we also need to understand about aspects of their ecology and biology as well, right? So by understanding their interactions with and the potential harms with the bottom trawlers, we may be able to propose and improve fishing practices or handling on board of handling of the fishermen on board these trawlers. So so we have a better chance to either reduce their bycatch or either improve their survival when they are discarded. And by that, we are working in another project, a parallel project, which is called NREP. And this project is, we put a camera in the fisherman vessel, and that created not a good relationship among us and the fishermen, because it's a way of electronic monitoring right now. And this project is also based on my PhD, so we are working with deep sea sharks and skates. And we are working with a company called OLSPS. They are a fishing company. They are not a fishing company, they are electronic fishing logbook company. So they developed this fishing logbook where we can put the sharks that we are collecting, the area we are collecting these sharks. And in the future, we want to say to fishermen to avoid high bycatch concentration areas of sharks and skates. So with that, we plan to decrease the bycatch of sharks, because in theory, no fisherman wants to collect sharks, because right now, like around 40% of those species are protected in Europe, so they cannot land these species. So it's important for them to find ways to avoid bycatch areas of sharks and skates. So that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to. It's a lot of goals we have at the moment, but they are all for conservation of deep sea sharks and skates, ecology and biology of deep sea sharks and skates.
I am at risk of taking up so much of your time, because I could honestly ask you about deep sea and deep sea sharks all day, but I will not do that. So I'm just going to bring it to a close. And I just wondered if there was one thing that you could, or one thing that you wish people knew about deep sea sharks, what would it be? So Paul, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I would always like people to learn about sharks is that that they're very diverse. You know, that there's a lot of different kinds of sharks out there. They're all very interesting, and a lot of them need our help, even if that's just learning more about them. I think a lot of shark fans are enamored with white sharks, which is great. It makes sense. It's fascinating, but I think a lot of people are just not aware of these other species, and because of that, I think most people don't realize that a huge amount of deep sea sharks are not protected. We don't even collect data on them a lot of the time when they're caught on fishing boats. So, sharks are very diverse, and there's a large portion of the species that are just kind of neglected because they're so poorly known by scientists, but also the public.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good one. And like we said earlier, if you don't know what there is, how do you, these species could go extinct without us even knowing that they existed, which would be really, really sad. And Sofia, how about you? What would be your one thing that you would tell people about deep sea sharks?
That they are equally as important as coastal species that we are aware of, and they are fragile. We don't know much about them, and we need to before it's too late. They are not being in Europe. They are not being physically targeted for the fisheries, but they are a huge amount of the bycatch. So they are still being fished, and they are not accounted for, which is a shame, because as we can see, they are dying. They don't survive this activity. At least for bottom trawl, they don't survive after they are caught. I think people should know that these sharks can be overexploited even if they are not targeted.
Yeah. Very, very, very important that we care about them and we show them some love. And they are very cute in their own way. And I agree with both of you on that. And my final question is, if you could be any species of shark, ray, or skate in the world, what would you be and why?
So I was thinking a lot about this question because it's for me it's really difficult to choose. I have many favorite species because if I want to be a shark species, I want to be my favorite, and I don't have a favorite. But I think the kitefin shark is really cool because I really enjoy his eyes, his cartoon eyes, and because of the bioluminescence that tricks the predators, and is the largest vertebrate known to have bioluminescence. So I would go for that one.
Nice. It would be cool to be able to glow in the dark. I do agree.
Yeah,
That'd be really fun.
exactly.
That would be pretty cool.
Paul, how about you?
I would like to be a sleeper shark. You know, they have a large range. They can swim deep and they live for so long. You know, there's that study where they live a couple hundred years. I think it was 350 years, give or take, like 150 years. But yeah, I think that'd be cool. I could just kind of take it easy, swim around slowly, explore the deep sea over a couple hundred years. That sounds cool.
That sounds like a pretty nice existence, I must say.
Exactly.
Just taking your time. But right, it has been so amazing to meet both of you, to learn about your research, and thank you so much for indulging me in my fascination with deep sea sharks. I'm sure a lot of listeners will be feeling the same right now.
Thank you for having me, Ayla. I appreciate that. And thank you, Paul, for the amazing knowledge that you have and that you share with us today. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Yes, thanks, Isla, for having me. And yeah, Sofia, pleasure to meet you. I hope we keep in touch.
This podcast was brought to you by the Save Our Seas Foundation. It was hosted and edited by me, Isla Hodgson. Our beautiful artwork is by Nicola Poulos, and the wonderful jingle that you can hear right now is by David Knight. An enormous thank you to Sofia and Paul for taking the time out of their day to come on the podcast and nerd out about deep sea sharks for us. You can find links to them and their work in the show notes of this episode, which you can find on the World of Sharks website. And a huge thank you to you at home for listening. If you like this episode, be sure to rate, review and subscribe. We really appreciate it when you do. And if you would like a question answered on the podcast, want to suggest a topic, or just want to say hi, please feel free to get in touch on isla@saveourseas.com or on social media by following @Save Our Seas Foundation on Instagram and @SaveOurSeas on Twitter. Alrighty, have a jawsome week and I'll see you next time.